welcome to the Growth Summit 2021 Spring Edition that we've got for you today. I'm really happy to be kicking us off, and there's an amazing panel that we have here for us and these are product and growth leaders from e-commerce, retail, finance, social, and entertainment industry. So I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to be having today. I'm Hastu, by the way, and I'll be the moderator for this particular session. A little bit about me. I lead the growth efforts for us here at MoEngage. And over the last few years, I've been working with some of the largest consumer businesses across Asia, Australia, and of course, America, essentially working with them to improve customer experiences across different channels. And now you can see me, and soon you'll be able to see rest of the panelists as well. So yeah, just with that, I'd request everybody on the panel to please go ahead and share your videos and let the world see you. And of course, introduce yourselves as well. So I see, Alexander, you've got your video on first. So if you want to kick us off and introduce yourself, please.
Absolutely happy to. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here. My name is Alexander Horowitz. I'm a senior marketer at SoundCloud. I'm focused primarily on CRM and creator success and engagement. For those unfamiliar, SoundCloud's basically a next generation music entertainment company. Basically means over 30 million creators upload audio content, including 12 million musicians, DJs, podcasters, et cetera, every single month. And my role is to make sure these creators, effectively these small businesses, find success on our platform. So also, actually my private time, having been a music journalist, just as a sort of side thing, I've basically been thinking throughout my career holistically about storytelling all the way from content creation to segmentation and marketing campaigns and analysis, to how we iterate and improve through data, and how this story gets told to different groups based on who they are, what they're, and what they're trying to accomplish. Very happy to be here.
All right, Alexander, thank you for that. And from one writer to another, Lomit, if you want to give us a quick introduction, please.
Sure, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me. So for everyone, my name is Lomit Patel. I head up growth at MView. And my team there is responsible for all of our user acquisition, retention, and monetization. And for anyone who doesn't know what MView is, we're one of the world's largest avatar-based social networking apps and one of the top grossing apps in the App Store.
All right, thank you for that, Lomit. Lucy, if you'd want to introduce yourself next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Lucy. I'm the Director of Retention Marketing here at Revolve, managing all the retention channels, including email, mobile push, SMS, and the loyalty program. A little background about Revolve. We are a e-commerce only retailer selling fashion trend apparels and then across different brands. Here at Revolve, we're very heavily data-driven. For a retention team specifically, we manage a lot of different personalized campaigns throughout the customer lifecycle. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, Lucy. Alex, you're up next.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me. This is Alex here from Wish. I'm the post-purchase product lead at Wish, zooming in from San Francisco. Wish is one of the world's largest e-commerce companies. You might have seen us in a Facebook ad or on a Lakers jersey, where my team is really focused on winning the trust of our customers and reducing their uncertainty when they purchase something through Wish and providing a very fair and positive customer experience. I manage a group of PMs and program managers who are working towards improving the user buyer retention through our shipping, delivery experiences, post-purchase, and customer support.
All right.
Happy to be here.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you. And Neha, I love the background, by the way. Thanks for being here. If you'd want to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Echoing my co-panelists, very excited to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Neha Jagannath. I'm a lending product manager at Tala. A little bit of background on Tala. We're a financial tech company with the mission to enable and accelerate financial health. And the way we do that today is by providing an Android app that offers instant credit and personalized financial education in Kenya, Philippines, Mexico, and India. So to give some background, most of our customers have little or really no access to banks or other traditional institutions. So our goal is to use like mobile technology and data science to really make these services simple and inclusive and accessible as well. Kind of dialing into what I do personally, I'm responsible for the overall growth product initiatives at Tala. So really any part of the user journey from sign up to disbursement. And so what that really means is that I work with a lot of our in-market teams to brainstorm initiatives and then consequently build solutions that are localized for these specific markets.
All right, amazing. Thank you, Neha. And again, thank you everyone, all of our panelists for being here. Really excited to get this conversation started. And of course, let's start with the basics. Let's talk about everything that's happening around us today and the digital transformation journey that it's nudged all of our brands on. And and something that I've noticed is it's not just the traditional businesses that have to transform and just change how they're doing business today. It's also the digital first businesses that really have to sort of shift everything that they're doing. I've noticed as a consumer over the last 1 year, my consumption patterns have changed significantly. I've been in quarantine for the last 10 days, and I've noticed just that 10 days of quarantine has meant a further change in how I'm interacting with apps, in the devices that I'm using to go online and really consume content, make my purchases, be it groceries or clothes or anything really. So I'd love to get all of your perspectives on how big a role has data really played for you in identifying how this consumption pattern and user behavior has changed over the last year, and how are you keeping up with it? How are you leveraging this data to keep up with how we consumers are just changing how we're interacting with the brands? So for that, Alex, I'd love to start with you here and love to get your perspective and what Wish has been doing through this time.
Yeah, definitely. I think in the beginning of the pandemic, it was, I think, a big shock to all of us. As many of you know, e-commerce has had a huge uprising during the pandemic because simply people just couldn't go shopping on a day-to-day basis. That led to a lot of growth and a lot of great tailwinds for Wish. And it also changed people's buying patterns. I'm sure Lucy can also speak to this. Traditionally, many people would buy a lot of fashion products. Wish is a great place for fast fashion and accessories. But obviously, as users were changing their shopping behavior, their needs also changed. So getting products that are more CPG focused is something that we've shifted to. The way that Wish uses data to sort of determine what you see in your feed, we call it, is based off of a user's buying patterns and what they viewed before and what's actually popular. Everything at Wish is launched as an experiment and that's done through an A/B test. And so we really use data. We don't launch anything without looking at the data first. You might even call us a little too data oriented.
All right. Thanks for that. I wonder if you can be too data oriented. I feel like it's always good to get as much data as you can and make the decisions. But I guess what you're saying is you don't act off of a hunch too much.
Yes, but I think the balance that you have to strike is that you also need to be listening to your customers and getting that qualitative feedback because your data can be saying things very differently throughout time, and there's a lot of very easy ways to manipulate your data.
All right. No, I hear you. Right, thanks for that, Alex. And staying with e-commerce, Lucy, you of course also have a background in BI. How has Revolve coped, and how has Revolve looked at data and leveraged it over the last year or so?
Yeah, Revolve is an e-commerce only retailer. We are very heavily data driven. Same as Alex, at Revolve, we use data to validate and inform our decisions. Like we use A/B tests a lot to confirm whether this strategy is good with us, it's worth it. So we have to do A/B tests, and then after the pandemic, we did notice customers' shopping behavior changes. Dresses usually is our top category for what we sell, but then since the COVID hit, we started noticing customers interested increase in loungewear and activewear. That sort of like align with what customers are doing, like quarantine, stay at home, so they want to be comfy. So dress is not their top trend now. Like we notice a lot of customers start buying activewear and loungewear. So we kind of shift our like focus on like promoting loungewear and activewear. So we all of this we use customers browsing data, we use their purchase data to like make our decisions and then move our strategy to be more targeted about what we promote.
All right, that's interesting. So what I hear is both of the e-commerce giants have been relying on A/B tests quite a lot and using your learnings from there to optimize. That's interesting. Over to you now, Alexander. I know this is something we spoke about last week as well. As you bring a slightly different perspective, where you're more focused on what's traditionally the supply side of the industry, which is your artists. I'd love to hear a little bit about how have you looked at data and how has the artist behavior really changed and how have you kept up with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I relate to a lot of what I've heard so far, especially the balance in between qualitative and quantitative. Some of these themes I think really are consistent across all of our experiences. I would say one of the first things that senior leadership at SoundCloud really thought about was understanding the distinction between our individual trends and industry trends. I know, for instance, in the beginning of lockdown periods, you could see consumption of streaming services like Spotify and YouTube and so forth dipped a little bit, which or at least I found somewhat surprising, perhaps because people were commuting. On the other hand, creators and bands or artists or YouTubers were getting more busy because they had time on their hands to be creative. This, of course, had a rolling effect in different locations around the world. So you take all of that and you then basically say, what can we change and what can we not? So we were very carefully monitoring industry trends to understand what's sort of implacable and what sort of can we then be agile, speaking to some of that choice paralysis that we'll sarcastically call too much data, which of course we can't really have, is what can we actually target and say, this is something we can change. So focusing therefore a lot on metrics about usability of the app, how people are consuming it, for the people who are here in terms of getting more people to come toward it, what areas are drying up in terms of places we can communicate. And then really, especially from a B2B perspective, while these artists are very unique, they're similar to other B2B industries in the sense that they are other businesses, which means you can learn a lot from them too. So we kept a close eye on how their behavior changed and understanding, to take an example from my industry, a lot of users started live streaming as a way of creating content for their fans. And a lot of them went to Twitch. So we actually created Twitch programming, which then comes more to our own data and thinking about things like, well, if we're going to where our fans are, or our creators rather, our community are, if they're on Twitch as an example, what is success on Twitch and how's it tied back to our OKR and our key performance indicators? And then on a campaign level, of course, looking at successful driving of these programs from all your standard push notification, email, so forth, open rates and engagement rates, but also tying that to engagement on this new platform, and then figuring out how to tie a new channel for us back into our overall brand loyalty, engagement, and the reason creators choose us among a whole host of competitors to interact with. So all of those pieces from the macro to the micro kind of came together to tell a story for us, and really advised our thinking as behavior changed.
All right. Well, that's really interesting, and it's interesting to see how you looked outside of your immediate environment as well, and you weren't just looking at data from SoundCloud, but you were looking at what your audience, your creators are doing outside of it as well. So that's really interesting to hear. Now over to you, Neha. Before I ask you a question, I know you have one for Lucy and Alex. So please go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of along the same vein of using A/B tests to really dial in on what should be a part of your product roadmap. I'm curious to know how you develop your A/B testing roadmap. Are there certain processes you follow, or like what does that look like for both of you?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So the way that I think about our roadmap and planning out what we want to test is I think about variables, to be honest. So we will come up with maybe a list of different variables that we may want to test throughout a quarter or a half, and we'll identify the projects that could help us actually develop those experiments. We work with data science to make sure that our experiment setup is correct and that we're able to isolate the variables, because ultimately we want to understand what was the actual thing that moved the lever. So an example of this is we actually changed a lot of our refund and our refund policy for late items over the last half. And so because we actually made a very large change, which we don't normally do, because normally we actually like to do sort of very small changes, so then you really can measure the true impact of those different variables. And so it's come to a point now where we don't totally understand, after having the experiment run for many months, we can't necessarily isolate which variable is doing what, and so we have to go back and potentially go and redesign our experiments to identify those variables. But that's sort of how I think about that in my team. I think it's really important that you understand what is the most important variable to prioritize. At Wish, I think that it really will depend on what you think moves your success metrics, and that's where data science comes into is so important, is that the data science team really helps us understand what are the opportunities and what are the problems that we have with our users, which are also opportunities. And so then we can sort of pinpoint what variables we should focus on, and then build experiments around it.
All right, interesting. Thanks, Alex. And Lucy, did you have a perspective on that? Do you do something similar, or is there something you do differently when you're talking about A/B tests?
It's kind of similar, but like I can only speak for retention team. For retention team, we do like smaller A/B tests for like campaigns. When we like normally if we start an A/B test, it's just we want to test if this feature works or not, and then if we are introducing a new campaign, we want to test like different versions of like how we create these campaigns, and then we want to test out like different variables to see which one perform better. So in the future, we can have rely on that better performing one. So we are more like a need focus, that we want to test this and want to figure out which one works. So that's like the most common use case for retention team at Revolve, that how we A/B test. But for the Revolve site itself, we have other A/B tests where we will involve like the BI team, data scientists to work out those A/B tests. So I'm just like, I can only speak for the retention team. We're more like a smaller A/B test project, that's like site-wide ones. Yeah.
All right, cool. No, that's good to know. Thanks, Lucy. And following something that Alex said about identifying the right variable to target, identifying the right data point. And Neha, this is something we spoke about yesterday as well. It's how do you identify the right data to target, to look at? How do you make sure that you're not focusing on the vanity metrics, that you really identify what's important to you, be it an A/B test or be it just on a day-to-day, the data that you look at? What's your approach been to this, Neha?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And personally, in my experience, that's where a lot of qualitative feedback comes into play as well. So really leveraging our qualitative insights tools, and especially at Tala, really engaging with our in-market teams and understanding the areas of opportunity really allows us to tie that variable or metric to a particular test that we want to run. So that way we have a little bit of context, first of all, for why we're testing something, and then also a perspective on what we think will change, so that lever or variable, and that helps us really identify the areas to test. Now there's a side exercise of sizing and effort that also goes into play when thinking about your A/B test and how that fits into your roadmap. And at the same time, kind of overall company goals and initiatives. But kind of aside those two aspects of planning that roadmap, that's really what we take a look at.
All right. So what I hear is just really important to know what you're trying to do, what you expect as an impact, and why. And that's really what's driving you being able to identify what to track and what's important here. Lomit, what's your perspective on this? How are you cutting out the noise? Because you, of course, are in the social entertainment sort of a space, and it's very different from what everybody else is doing here. And I imagine there's a lot more data available to you as well. There's a lot of little things that people are doing on your apps. How are you cutting out the noise? And you're on mute. I'm glad I got to say it.
So what I would say is that we're kind of in a unique position because actually MView is kind of at an intersection between like gaming and social, and so because a lot of things that people do is they when they come to MView they create like an avatar and they kind of interact with other people from all around the world and create these virtual worlds and create friendships and meaningful connections. But the thing that people may not realize is ultimately how do you make money, right? And for us, it's probably very similar to what e-commerce is, because we're a two-sided marketplace. So on the one side, we're trying to bring in a lot of users, and then on the other side, in terms of how we monetize, primarily we have the biggest virtual store of things that people can use to customize the look and feel of avatars and all these different worlds that they create with over 50 million items. And so most of our revenue comes from in-app purchases. A smaller portion comes from advertising. So we have two ways to monetize users. But in terms of using data, it's really important for us. And I can give you a couple of use cases. But for example, when the pandemic hit, obviously, it impacted different industries in different ways. But for us, obviously, being social and gaming, just like e-commerce was one of the ones that benefited. But what we've done, even before the pandemic, we've tried to automate a lot of tasks and processes. So we try to run a lean team and try to leverage technology as much as possible to really take care of a lot of the rudimentary tasks and processes. So on user acquisition, as an example, we have a machine that holistically looks across all the different channels where we're spending money. And ultimately, it knows the outcome that we're looking to get to. Our outcome is really focused on two KPIs, which is the cost to acquire a customer and the return on investment. As long as we're hitting those goals, then we're kind of in a position where we have an open budget, so we can pretty much spend as much as we want to drive growth, as long as we're hitting those outcomes. And so when the pandemic hit, for example, that was a time where a lot of advertisers started to panic and pull their budgets to really figure out what they were going to do. But because we weren't having humans that were sort of looking at this, because we were all everyone was pretty emotional at that time, the machine started to figure out that the costs of targeting the users we wanted to target was coming down so much that, even if our conversion rate came down, we would still be able to hit our goals. And so we started to double down on our budgets. And so one use case was, our budget, we 3x'd our budget in the month of March, like a year ago, when everybody else was pulling out. And we were able to benefit from acquiring users and bringing a lot of new users in who didn't really know about us at the time. So we benefited driving growth that way. And another area where we used data to really help us was we started getting a lot of organic growth happening. We didn't actually get organic, but we were getting all this additional organic growth that was happening. And, we were able to kind of look at the data pretty quickly and realize that a lot of the organic growth that was coming was from former users. And so generally we do win back and re-engagement campaigns, but it's usually to a window of up to 3 months. And what we realized, a lot of these people are coming beyond the 3-month window. So being able to act on that data pretty quickly, we're able to extend the look back window on how far we wanted to go on win backs. And that was another lever that really helped us to drive a lot of growth. And then the third one in terms of using data was, we started seeing a lot of users coming from these different countries that we didn't even like really spend any money on. And really there was a good correlation to where there was shelter in place being enforced in different countries and where people were starting to look for, ways to try and connect with other users. And so example being like France and Germany were two markets that we had kind of on our roadmap that we were going to localize. But because we started seeing an influx of all these users coming in and all this natural organic growth, we were able to prioritize and rejuggle our roadmap where this was really on the roadmap for Q4 last year. We were able to bring it into Q2. And so, those are just three examples of how, we're using data in real time and being able to draw insights really quickly was able to help us pivot and grow faster.
Right. That's quite interesting. And something you spoke about is how machines helped you make a few decisions that maybe normally people on the team might not have. And you're of course a big believer in AI with your latest book as well. I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about the role that AI has played in just the decision-making processes and how you've used data effectively to enable AI. And I think most importantly, how do you figure out the best place to use AI to begin with? How do you make sure that you're using it in the right spots? And how do you roll out something like this?
Yeah, so what I would say is, I wrote this book called Lean AI, which was really sort of based on the way we sort of went through our own digital transformation at MView, and really started to really figure out, if we wanted to grow faster, and how could we lean on leveraging machines to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. Because for anyone that's based in San Francisco or in any of these markets, know how hard it is to keep hiring more people, right? It's a challenge. So, we wanted to try and figure out how technology could help us solve for that. But the biggest challenge with any transformation, what I've come to realize, having done this at several companies, it really starts with people first. You really have to convince the executive and the board on the value. And I think the mistake that most companies do is try to set these lofty aspirations in terms of what AI is going to potentially do, and try to look at these use cases that they take a long time to really figure out the payback and the value on what it does to the business and the impact. And so, I kind of reverse that because, ultimately, when it comes to growth, it's all about driving new users and driving revenue. So what was the quickest and easiest way that we could sort of, use those use cases? And that's where we, looked into user acquisition as one use case. We looked into retention around, how we could personalize the onboarding user experience to get people more engaged quickly into the product, and try to replicate and build those habits and behaviors that would really lead to a higher lifetime value user for us. And so, using those two sort of use cases was a lot easier to kind of get support behind than to sort of go into other territories, which was a little bit out of our zone, which is like, hey, let's really redo this whole product, right? Because that would have been a different political battle to fight.
All right, I hear you, and that's quite interesting. So I think what you're saying is very similar to what Alex and Lucy were also saying about A/B testing, right? So you just broke it down into smaller pieces, and what you recommend brands do is find a smaller problem to solve, show the value, and build on it rather than decide to just introduce AI across your entire product overnight.
Yeah, and what I would add to the A/B testing, at least what's enabled us to sort of change our mind shift and how we think about A/B testing, because it's very similar to how the others were talking about it. Because before, you had to sort of interject some kind of opinion into what's the hypothesis, what's the potential outcome, and what's the effort level, and you would sort of prioritize based on that. And for us, because we kind of get the machine to do a lot of the execution, now it's less about sort of prioritizing how much work is going to go into it. It's more about what's the quickest and fastest way to kind of, just put something out, even if it's not perfect, but get something out there and let the machine be able to execute it and let us know pretty quickly what's working. Then we can always go back and perfect it and keep looking at new iterations to get better.
All right, well, that's interesting to hear. And how about you, Alex? At Wish, have you leveraged AI a lot? Has this been something that's come into play?
Yeah, I love what Lomit had to say. I think it's so true. We have such a hard time finding engineers, and Wish also has an extremely lean team. We have 825 people, and we are a multi-billion-dollar business that's gone public, and we just can't hire enough people. So I would love to learn more about how you've sort of leveraged AI. The way that my team has leveraged AI and really machine learning is we've built out a refund risk engine. And our Wish Assistant, which is like our primary customer support product, which is essentially a bot that handles the majority of our customer support tickets at Wish. It actually, when it first launched, it reduced customer support tickets handled by a human by 60%. And now our job is to basically figure out other ways, not only to improve the user's experience with Wish Assistant, but also to reduce the cost of support overall. So one of the things that we've done is we have looked at a user's profile and looked at what is their risks to the company of giving them a refund. So we often have many users that are asking for refunds. They may and there's obviously a risk to the business because that hurts our merchants and then also hurts our revenue. And so what we'll do is that we'll actually look at like different patterns on the user's refunds, as well as different patterns in like their user profile, how many transactions they've had. We'll give them a risk score. And then based off that risk score, we will actually either send them to an agent, or we will have them we'll have the Wish Assistant do a refund in real time, which is obviously great for the users that are good users because they get that refund right away, which encourages them to repurchase, which is also something that we need. So it's definitely a balance, but that was a very much a hand-in project. I'm sure your team works with data science and engineers on building out those models, but that was really one of our main AI projects.
All right, that's actually really interesting. And I reckon in the finance space as well, Neha, and I know you've got a little bit of experience with, at least a little bit of experience with AI yourself. What role has AI played for you in your vertical? And particularly with Tala, I find it quite interesting because you're operating in these four very different markets, four very different countries. How have you adapted, really? I'd love to know more.
Yeah, I would say definitely from a data science perspective, like what that has allowed us to do is to really open up areas of opportunity for accessing those pockets of users that need the financial access. And so I think that's the greatest win that has given us. In a previous life, when I was at Lending Tree, I had a similar experience that Lomit did, where we really leveraged AI when it came to A/B testing. And so that kind of helped mitigate some of the lift that it would have taken to kind of manually run those tests. But kind of thinking through what Tala's mission is, we really focus on that data component to help learn more about our customers so that we can provide them with the loans that will actually be effective for them.
Sorry, this time I was on mute, but no, thanks for that, Neha. And moving on from AI, something I also wanted to talk about a little bit today is, do you feel like brands have had to sort of reimagine what a customer journey looks like? Have you had to go completely back to the drawing board and say there's been a fundamental shift? And shift in how the users expect to be communicated to, how they expect to be able to interact with your brands. And if that's the case, what sort of data have you looked at? What sort of trends have made you really think about how to change this user journey? And maybe I'll start with you, Alexander, because um, with artists especially, have you seen a need to fundamentally change that user experience and journey?
That's a great question. And certainly working with artists, as I mentioned, I very much view my role, the piece of it communicating with artists on our platform, as being just a unique example of sort of B2B thinking. And artists, as effectively small businesses, tend to be very adaptive and very scrappy, looking for whatever can give them sort of an edge, which is one way in which we like to use them as a place to learn as well as to market to. And I think at the end of the day, what we've learned from our artists is that the world is increasingly digital. Or I should really say hard stop, the world is digital, right? So in terms of customer journey, the question for me is less so, as it gets more digital, what do we do? But in this digital world, what's coming next? And, it's very difficult a lot of times to see around that corner. I mentioned earlier that we're always looking at our industry and both competitors and sort of adjacent businesses, but also looking at the interests of the companies to whom we serve, right? So looking at Gen Z and where they behave and what they like and consume and how that's accelerated, those changes accelerated during a lockdown, for instance, has allowed us to kind of understand how their behavior changes, and we really follow the consumer. So, if that means that we have more users uploading on our desktop experience, and this goes back, I think, to something I think it was Alex who raised initially about the difference between what people say they want and how they behave. If we see a lot of users uploading content through the desktop experience, we need to make sure our desktop experience is optimized for our creator community. If, on the other hand, we recognize that that's because we don't have a good enough experience in uploading on mobile, we need to make that work better. So everything about how we talk to our users, touching on what everyone has said about A/B testing and things like that, we're regularly testing to understand both on a campaign level, how are they engaging with individual messages, how are they engaging with automated lifecycle programs across messages, looking at your standard open rates for email and push notification reactivity and things like that, but also then tying that directly to other key indicators that we know suggest the health of this user on our platform. So I would say that, yeah, digital first, absolutely. And if you're not in digital now, if there's an extent to which you don't think of it from that perspective, congratulations. I think you have a massive opportunity in front of you to really think about a new space, because increasingly this world is digital and it's going to continue to just be a matter of how tastes change and how regulation changes around that behavior.
All right. Now, interesting. And something that you said just now, the difference between, is your desktop experience just really good or your mobile experience just really bad? So I take it then it's the qualitative feedback that you spoke about earlier that helps you draw that distinction and really understand what this data is telling you. But do you have any other recommendations on how do you make that distinction? And is it good or is just the alternative really bad?
Yeah, that's also a great question. It's a mix of inputs, and finding the balance is really, I think, the biggest challenge for us. So we have people at SoundCloud who full-time, what they do is audience research, and they do surveys and things like this. So it is still data. It is data from a more spoken word perspective, right? And that still has a lot of your basic marketing fundamentals in terms of segmentation and understanding your audience and their biases, aggregating the information the right way and understanding how to digest it and how to present it in a way that the teams can learn from. While simultaneously, we're looking at things like user adoption, or I should say tool adoption, drop off at different parts of our app experience, of our website experience, how those change over time. And we're very regularly trying to marry the two pieces. So, and it's interesting too, there are times when you'll have all this data that says people drop off here from doing this, and we can see it. And there are all these times when people go, that part of your business sucks, and they will tell you. And it's really either really obvious to us, or we really didn't think it was so bad, or vice versa. They love something and we didn't realize how popular it was or why it was so important to them. Because they're always, again, especially from a B2B perspective, SoundCloud is also a listening platform. So we do direct consumer work as well. But in both cases, and especially in the case when you're leading with businesses, I think, who have their own set of objectives, their own KPI, they're very knowledgeable of what they're trying to accomplish. And both between the revealed and expressed preferences, you really have a bunch of different channels to look at. So for me, the biggest then challenge as you identify those channels to ingest that information is finding the balance of what you see versus what you hear, and how you sort of try and effectively test into the right answer.
All right, cool. No, thank you for that, Alexander. And Lucy, what's your perspective here? Do you think brands need to fundamentally reimagine this customer journey? And how has quantitative versus qualitative feedback sort of played a role in how you're doing that?
Yeah, for sure. Online shopping is very different from like offline shopping, but there's an advantage with online shopping that you actually can know what user looked at instead of like have a sales assistant following customers around the store. So for online shopping, what we really focus on is that we focus on the funnel of the customer, like from where the journey started, which channel they came in from, whether they're from organic, whether they're from unpaid or paid, and then whether they're from like a retargeting campaign or it's a regular campaign. They're all different. Like for retargeting, it's better to lend them to a specific products that they viewed at or they left behind in their cart. So for those type of traffics, we lended them to the product they look at or lend to their shopping cart to have them like to encourage them to finish their purchase. But then for regular promotion campaigns, we lend them to a custom-made product page where have all the trendy clothing all put together. Like we tell a story of like this trend for the seasonal like this dress trend, like some dress trend for more like a spring or summer vibe. So the traffic is different. So where we start their journey is different, whether from a product page or from a custom-made page. And then we track from when they start the journey to even after their journey, like after they made a purchase, we can follow up with them with like complete your look. Like you purchase these pieces, we think it might be other pieces can make your look complete and then make you like look better with the purchase you made. So we have like after journey campaigns to follow up. So like all different campaigns. Like so we heavily using all the site behaviors that user have, whether add to cart, view, and then their purchase history. So they're all important data to look at for like online shopping. And then like for us, online shopping, you really need to focus on like your customer journey, like where they stop is also important part. Like whether they stop browsing after a couple products or whether they stop one day add product to their cart. So where they stop is also different data point that you can use different strategy to retarget them. So that's how we do.
All right, cool. No, thank you for that, Lucy. And Neha, what about you? What about in your world in finance? Do you think there's been a change? Do you think there is a need for a change in reimagining user journeys, really?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say as a digital lender, it's really the core of what we do, right? Like we really massively lean on using technology to really drive not only our product, but also our growth and acquisition. So two things to think about. The first is, since Tala is a global business, we have to think about who our customers are. And so the segment of customers that we're working with are typically small business owners or salaried workers that, you know, they have some financial stability, but they aren't really seen trustworthy by financial institutions. So you're also working with a group of customers who maybe aren't as digitally savvy as you normally would work with, at least for me personally, in my previous life of working with consumers in North America mostly. So there's that aspect of thinking through the user journey, where we heavily lean on, as I mentioned earlier, our insights team and our in-market team to really understand, okay, who are these people? What are their spending habits like? What do they typically like to, what are like big milestones in their lifetime where they will actively seek these different financial types of support. But then another thing to think about is kind of the macro changes that are happening right now, right? So whether it is COVID or any other sort of macro change, we always have to take that into consideration and think about how that influences our user journey as well. And so that's where kind of taking in that qualitative insight, we can then match it with, tracking our conversion funnel metrics or our high level KPIs and seeing how that aligns and then adjusting from there.
And I did it again on mute, but no, that is really interesting. Thanks for that. Yeah, and on that thread, I'm gonna come to you, Lomit. And I'm coming to you with this particular question, particularly because of your lean on AI, if I may say that. How do you find that balance? How do you find the balance between automating and using machine learning and artificial intelligence and the qualitative feedback and just listening to people and having those conversations and optimizing your journeys from that?
That's a really good question. So what I would say is that ultimately, we do both. We do obviously, AI and machine learning, but which sort of tells you what's going on. But we always try to do the qualitative in terms of why something is happening and to try and understand, for example, taking the onboarding flow as an example, there's obviously parts where people are finding more friction or dropping off, and a machine's not really going to tell you how to solve for that until you talk to real people, right? And so one of the things that we try to do on our team is to sort of become the biggest advocate for the customer at the end of the day, and try to lead from an empathetic point of view. And so, everything that we do, every conversations we have with other cross-functional teams that we work with, ultimately it's all about making things better for the customer. And the best way to look at that is to really, start with ourselves. All of us are customers too, right? Like, would we want this experience for ourselves? And if not, then how can we make it better? And I think the great part about a lot of these businesses that are becoming digital first is that the bar continues to get raised higher and higher. So, if we don't continue to improve and get better at providing a great first-time user experience, then people have choices and they can go elsewhere. So that's what it ultimately comes down to. And one other thing, that we look at to really help strengthen our case on making these different, priority changes on the roadmap is as simple as monitoring the App Store reviews and ratings. That's the biggest thing. Ultimately, that's real-time feedback. No one can complain that anybody's gaming the system at that stage, right? So it's like, listen, guys, and there's obviously a strong correlator to the higher your ratings are, the more organic growth you're going to get for the business.
All right, cool. Now that is really interesting, and thank you. And we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna just go around and just a final question that I had for all of you, and that is just would love to understand your most successful growth story, right? This could be something that you saw as a trend last year and made a change, and that proved to be really successful, or further back, just where you were able to identify a trend, make a change, and saw some real success from that. So Lucy, I'd love to start with you here.
Yeah, we do a lot of personalization. One of the most successful story is that before so we sell like products across different brands. And then before we made this change, we kind of rely on what customer actually hearted as their favorite brand. But we decided to use what customer actually purchased and then what they view. Because if you keep viewing a product from one brand, you show some interest in that brand. Like if you view like 10 products within past months from this specific brand, we think that you might be slightly interested. Like it's not like you're actually it's not like your actually favorite brand, but it's like our inferred like your favorite brand. So we look at a lot like customer view history and then their purchase history to add in their besides from the brand they actually hearted in our system, to add their inferred favorite brand. So once we have new arrivals from those brands, we can send a trigger campaign, like personalized trigger campaign to that customer including their favorite brand's new arrival and also their inferred brand's new arrival, because not everyone actually heard their brands. But if customers have been on our site, we know that they view certain products, and then we can run some like algorithm to figure out what their inferred brand is. So this way, we actually increase our sent volume for the trigger emails from thousands to like millions. Like that increase our volumes a lot, and then it actually really help with like personalize like our trigger channels. So that's just one of the story that we use like other customer data instead of what customer actually give us to increase our channel performance.
All right, that's interesting. So really just looking at brand affinity, not just as a product of purchase, but going further, looking at the browsing history and just the interactions in general, and not focusing just on purchases. That's pretty cool. Thanks for that, Lucy. Neha, how about you?
Sure. For this example, I'll pull from my previous experience at LendingTree. At the time, I was the product manager in charge of the homepage of the site. So we were really focused on our organic traffic and our brand traffic that was coming through. And one thing we realized was that based on seasonality, there was a different priority of loans that were relevant to our users. And so we did run a test to kind of rearrange the product offerings on the page based on that seasonality and allowed that to update so that it could account for the changes in the market. And what we found was that it was very successful and really did help us grow that page as an acquisition channel. So that was a great way for us to kind of leverage data and also kind of watch the trends in the market to see how we could grow our users.
All right, that's really interesting. Again, thanks, Neha. And on to the two Alexes. We'll start with you, Alexander, first.
Sure. One of my favorites was also from a past experience. Not that we haven't had a ton of great experiences at SoundCloud, but I thought this was sort of like a usable takeaway to play with, which is that in this example, subscription company, similar audiences at SoundCloud. And basically, while subscription was our primary income driver, we also have other services that we can sell their products and things that we can upsell our creators. Of course, it's upsell among us as marketers and business people. It was support from both a branding standpoint and a sincere standpoint of helping our users be successful. And so we used to just sort of spend a lot of the time of our email marketer sending another email every day about, hey, have you bought this product yet? Have you tried this service and so forth? The data that we had in our email platform at that time wasn't ideal for knowing how to segment based on past purchases. We're not really an e-commerce company, so that wasn't really our forte. We weren't set up to do that. So we invested the time into analyzing purchases and purchase behavior of those products by our database, our audience. We know when we kicked off these products, we have a sense of time of how long we've been messaging this audience about these products. And what we found was that over the life cycle of a subscriber, we were able to basically map out the number of emails about a product or service, after which, if they hadn't purchased it, the likelihood that they will drop to near zero. So what we actually did was we created a new onboarding that sprinkled product upsells across the experience to get to that minimum number. The thinking being that then we'd say, okay, let's not spend every day hammering this, which from a normal e-commerce perspective, having a constant reminder of the products you're selling is actually often beneficial. But in a subscription service where we're worried about cancels, right, where we're more worried about exits than we are the individual product, this was the sprinkles on top. So we wanted to first do no harm to our subscription business. So we basically baked how much resistance we were able to analyze towards pushing these products and bake that into every user's journey, and then would have one-off campaigns over the top that took less of our time when we realized strategically it made sense to run a sale or to do something special or what have you that we could then do on an ad hoc basis or a calendar basis, so to speak. So it reduced the time of the email marketer doing stuff that might have actually been harming the company, freed them up to think about other things, and gave us breath essentially to know we're still always pushing these things, but can focus then on our core business. So kind of a cool example of looking at the data and also thinking of a creative solution to make sure we're not messing with our own business by talking too much about the wrong thing to the wrong people.
All right. No, I love that. I love that bit of using data to know when to stop. I think that's really important as marketers to do, and that's stop when you know it's not going to provide you any more value. So that's really cool. Thanks, Alexander. And Alex, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm going to take it way back to my Uber Eats, my Uber days, back in like 2016, 2017, when Uber Eats was just starting to grow. I think that was sort of an amazing story for Uber. It was a very like small incubated team that just became super hyper focused on the customer experience, the restaurant experience, and the delivery driver experience. And I think that focusing so much on the qualitative while also learning from the successes and the failures of Uber was a really great sort of like learning opportunity for the team that really helped Uber Eats succeed, because they had the foundation of Uber's success and learning from that to like scale a business. So while I was there, I was in charge of some of our customer support strategy and our customer support policies, which was a super interesting time for us because everything was so new and learning how to scale things. And yeah, just probably one of my favorite teams I've ever worked with, one of my favorite companies I've ever worked for. It was just an awesome experience.
All right, cool. Thank you for that, Alex. And finally, Lomit.
So for me, what I would say is mindset's is really important. And so, this company or any other company, the most important thing is really to get everybody to really adopt a growth mindset. And so, as long as people are really open to test, learn, and iterate, then the second part is how do you improve the process to really increase your velocity of running as many experiments to really figure out what's going to work and what's not, what's working and what's not. So, I think just focusing on those two things has really helped, us, not only here, but in previous startups to really become successful. Because ultimately, it's not like looking at things like either you're like winning or losing. It's really either you're learning or you're growing, right? So.
All right, cool. No, thank you for that. And it's great to hear. It looks like everybody on this panel believes that testing is something that's been really beneficial. Testing, learning from it, looking at the data, and just improving from there and doing smaller tests rather than trying to change everything overnight. So to me, that's been the key takeaway from the conversation today. So again, Neha, Lomit, Alexander, Alex, and Lucy, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for the conversation and sharing all of your experiences. For me, it's been great to learn from all of you and some really cool insights. So thank you again.